So one other very kind of useful way to think about GDP is to go through what we call this value added method. And so let's go back to our pizza example. And remember that a pizza sells for $10. Now, terminology of GDP, the pizza is the final good, right? It's the last thing that was sold. It was the end of the production process. Let's look at what goes into making a pizza and how we might account for the value added along the way, right? So what makes up a pizza is, you have to have dough, right? And so where does the dough come from? It comes from flour. Flour comes from wheat, right? So here I'm kind of going along the production process and saying, well, a farmer produces some wheat and they sell it to a miller for $2. The miller takes the wheat, turns it into flour, and sells that flour to the pizza maker for $6. The pizza maker takes the flour, turns it into a crust, makes pizza, and sells that to you for $10. So the $10, so notice a bunch of things were produced in our economy, right? And all we're counting is the $10 for the pizza. Why? Well, the $10 already incorporates the value of the goods that went into it, right, at their market prices. And one way we can keep track of this is to use this value added method. So what I'm going to do at each step in the production process is only calculate the additional value that was added, meaning the value of my good minus the cost that I used to produce it. So for the farmer, they sell the wheat for $2. I'm assuming they had no intermediate goods that they purchased. And so their total value added is $2, right? The miller produces something worth $6, but it costs them $2 in inputs to make it. So the additional value added by the miller is $4. Same thing for the pizza producer. I sell a pizza for $10. If I subtract out the cost of my goods used to make it, I end up with $4 in value added. If I add up all of these value addeds, I get exactly $10. $2 from the farmer, $4 from the miller, $4 from the pizza maker gets me to the final total price of $10, right? So that's why we focus in GDP on just the value of the final good, because that value already incorporates the value of the goods used to make it. Okay, so what is a final good as opposed to anything else? Well, the other thing we could have is an intermediate good, which is a good or a service used in the production of something else. Right? And so in our example, the pizza had an intermediate good of flour. The flour had an intermediate good of wheat, right? And so there's lots of ways I could take all this information and turn it into GDP. I could calculate value added at each step and add it up. I could take the value of the final good, $10, and add that up. Or I could take the total value of everything minus the total cost of intermediate goods. So think about that. Total value of production is, if I include everything, 10 plus 6 plus 2, I would subtract out the cost of intermediate goods, which is minus 6 minus 2, and I will still be left with the $10, right? Which is why it's easiest to focus on the final good or service. Now, you have to be careful because sometimes to make sure that we're fully understanding the concept of GDP, some of the questions that are asked, sometimes the value of the intermediate goods is relevant, sometimes it's not. So let me give you another way that I could frame this pizza question. Right, so suppose I told you the following information. So an economy produces 100 pizzas, and the inputs to production of those 100 pizzas totals $800. The pizzas sell for $10 each. What is GDP? Right? And so I have to be very careful to understand how I use the information provided. Right? Now I know, given my examples, that I only want to focus on the final good or service. So I don't want to add in the value of intermediate goods, but I have to know when I have the price and quantity of a final good, and then I don't have to mess with the value of the intermediate goods. Right? So if I wanted to answer this question, I would focus on 100 pizzas at $10 each. That's the final good. So I know that GDP in this case is simply 10 times 100, which is $1,000, right? I don't even need to mess around with the value of the intermediate good. I already know the value of the final good. So sometimes we need to think about the value of the intermediate goods, given the way the information is provided. Other times we don't. So as you read the questions in the homework, be very careful to pay attention to the information you have and how you can assemble that to arrive at GDP.